I have never seen an object show go in a direction that was anything like Show's Over. To me, watching the first episode was such a breath of fresh air for the OSC. It might be a bit rough around the edges, but all in all, it's an amazing concept. It gets so many things right, and even though it's pretty rough around the edges, watching it was a joy. Although I definitely want to go over what this show could do better, since I think the concept still holds a ton of potential. So first things first, let's get started on the story. One of my favorite parts of this episode was just getting to see the Modern Objects characters again. I've always really liked the adorable cast and the cute world that Modern Objects had. The style is very unique, expressive, and yet simple in a way that not many other object shows have. And seeing the cast just messing around again was great to see. Everyone's just as entertaining as ever. It feels like there was a lot of care put into having this feel just like the original Modern Objects, and it's very well done. All of the original voice actors even come back to voice the main three. I really like Dane's new voice for Map. It's very similar, but Map now has a more happy yet slightly nervous quality that I think works really well as a new take for the character. Although I don't really like how their lines sometimes sound a bit more distant and quiet than everyone else's lines.
Well, at least we're all here in time for movie night.
Does it have giant monsters in it?
Oh, I wish.
Great, now we really do need to replace the TV.
You're welcome. It has dead pixels anyway.
Sigh. Well, he did say he wasn't feeling well.
Ugh, were the chips really that bad?
Nothing too distracting, it was just pretty noticeable for me. Now, Taft as Bucket sounds just as good as ever. He's always given the character an expressive annoyance and condescension that I just can't imagine Bucket without.
Oh, I am so sorry, connoisseur of nachos. Those are at half price.
I noticed a very new personality from Rick's performance as Spade. His voice has always had a cartoonish quality in the original show, but it's cranked up to 11 here. And that can be good, but in this case, I found it to be more of a problem. When you compare some of his lines with each other, they make him sound like he's a completely different person.
We need to get more nachos or we'll miss out on movie night. It has dead pixels anyway.
Wonderful.
Now, where's that nacho I've dropped?
Hey, Bucket, these chips are stale.
Now, I totally understand wanting to sprout more life into your character through his voice, but Spade's voice changes so much that there's a line that sounds like he's doing a new take in the middle of a sentence.
It's some weird B-movie called Object Fear that Matt wants to watch.
Again, it's great to exhibit a wide variety of emotions through your voice, but when it sounds like your character is going through the 5 stages of grief in the span of 10 seconds, it makes for a performance that sounds more inconsistent than anything. Spade's voice is still entertaining, but there's a lack of identity that stems from it, especially since the other two voice talents maintain a much more consistent identity throughout the episode. But something I was into was having Spade bite into what he thought was a nacho and getting infected. That was really creative and fitting with his love of nachos. It also worked very well as a transition into the darker section of the episode. Now, something that I haven't seen many object shows try to pull off is horror, and I think it's partly because there isn't a whole lot of scary stuff to do when it comes to objects, but this show takes a really interesting approach with it. It's no secret that Show's Over takes inspiration from Learning with Pibby. I mean, the first episode literally has Pibby and OSC Pibby in its hashtags. I don't think it's very confidential information. And seeing the idea being realized with object show characters was so cool to see. The visualizations of every glitchy, liquefied monster was just fascinating to witness. This isn't stuff you see in an object show. It's weird, it's dark, it's creepy, and I'm all for it. And introducing it all with an exciting chase scene with really cool visuals worked as a great introduction to the show's whole aesthetic. Like, look at this giant 4 blob, it's so cool! However, it was around this point in the episode where I started to notice the rough presentation of the show. I don't think it looks bad by any means, but once I got past the halfway point, I realized that the animation looked kind of unrefined to me. I spotted some little visual goofs, like some animations not quite matching with the audio.
Spade, he just walked out of the house and disappeared.
There were 2 shots of Map that looked weirdly blurry for some reason. Some animations just looked strange to me, like Bucket's run cycle. Her steps are pretty slow compared to Map, so she looks more like she's speed walking, and she seems more worried than terrified. The claw on this drone dramatically swings to a stop as if it was jolted to a halt, even though it was very clearly slowed down. The way Map wakes up in this scene kinda bugs me because he snaps awake as if startled by a loud noise, but the only noise happening in this scene is Spade's quiet footsteps. And I'm sorry, but this shelf does not look good. I admit, I have no experience improvements in background design, but this looks like an unfinished blueprint. This scene has much snappier animation than this scene, which has much smoother animation than this scene. I think you get the idea. Obviously, these are tiny nitpicks, but they're numerous. These animation mistakes make for a slightly unpolished appearance that runs through the entire episode. Definitely nothing that ruins the episode for me, but it became pretty noticeable. But I still think the whole concept absolutely makes up for it. Once Rubber saves Bucket and Map, we get a more in-depth explanation of what the corruption is. She describes it as a void that merges with and consumes anything in its path to form a hive mind-like fluid. The corruption travels through reality by means of electronic screens and integrates themselves onto technology. Honestly, I'm just glad that this explanation exists, because I feel like with stories that have a mysteriously terrifying monster as the main gimmick, it's easy to dismiss explaining the limits of what that mysterious monster can do, so you can just do whatever you want with it. When you don't establish what your monster really is, you don't need to maintain any consistency with it, and that's rarely a good thing. Which is why it's good that the creators have a good idea of how the corruption works and its limits. I just hope that they manage to hold themselves to these rules, because it's never fun when big scary monsters fudge their rules for the sake of the plot. And even though the corruption heavily relies on traveling through technology, it still manages to be scary and really cool, which brings me to the episode's ending. My favorite part of the episode has gotta be when Map and Rubber are met with the twisted, disturbing hellscape that the corruption created. There are black, inky figures, blood-red skies, and a giant, terrifying form monument with eyes poking out of it. It's a sight to behold. Seeing Spade corrupted and lifeless with a creepy, twisty body and slashing Map in the eye acted as a great representation of the novelty and potential of this show. The grandiose scale and the frightening imagery are all shown in full force here. The realization of how utterly broken this world now is hits you like how Spade hits Map in the face. And following it up with an oddly gloomy ending where Map just hopelessly screams for help was pretty messed up. But it definitely worked as a contrast from the rest of the episode. The disturbingly quiet and hopeless nature of this moment made it really stand out. Not to mention that it's also a very creative way to show credits. It adds another disturbing layer to the whole situation. And then finishing with X's voice coming from a distant yet hopeful light was a very interesting way to end the episode. All of these interesting factors culminated into what made for a very memorable ending to the episode. The unconventional execution of it all only made it better. And that's honestly the best way to describe this show for me. Unconventional, but very well done. And while that still stays true for me, I did start to notice some weird writing mistakes as I rewatched the episode. For example, in this scene, after Spade leaves the house, Map tells Bucket that
He did say he wasn't feeling well.
which is weird since Spade never said anything remotely close to that. All he said was,
I'm just gonna go outside to get some fresh air.
It's really not a big deal, but it's a weird little detail that I even noticed when I first watched. In this scene, Rubber freaks out at Bucket for ignoring her calls and texts that were trying to warn her about the corruption. And it's shown that she tried calling her through a Morse code phone call and some text messages that used Caesar cipher. These were really cool details, and it's great to see that sort of continuity, and I'm sure that a lot of work went into these details, but it's still kind of stupid. If the corruption is such a world-endingly big deal, are we seriously meant to believe that Rubber never used English to tell her? Is coming to her lab really something that requires Morse code and Caesar ciphers to communicate? Why would she want to keep her messages that private? Is privacy seriously our main priority when there's a glitchy blob that's about to kill everyone? I get it, it's a joke that highlights Rubber's lack of social intelligence, but when it's exaggerated to a point where it affects the main story this much, that's where it crosses a line for me. Wouldn't it have been easier to just say that Rubber and Bucket don't have each other's numbers? I mean, we've never even seen the two of them trading contacts anyway. Moving on, in the scene where Matt, Bucket, and Rubber are running from the corruption, Rubber says,
We have to get to the room with the reality jumping gun I've created. It's our only hope out of here.
and then seconds later, she just says that they went the wrong way and they go outside. Okay, I guess Rubber just doesn't know her own laboratory then? Does she also lack navigational intelligence? Details like these, no matter how small they might be, also make the writing feel a bit unpolished. Again, definitely nothing that ruins the episode, and it's not nearly as noticeable as the animation slip-ups, but for a show that seems to be very story-focused, it makes me a bit worried about future episodes. However, I don't want all that to discredit the amount of genuine potential this show holds. With the right amount of work and care, this could definitely become a series to remember, and I'm incredibly interested in seeing what this show has to offer with its concept. And with the way this episode is setting the stage, it feels great to say that this show is far from over.